the spring of 1918, something invisible began moving through the bodies of young American soldiers at a military base in Haskell County, Kansas. They coughed. They bled from their ears and noses. Their skin turned a strange shade of blue as their lungs filled with fluid. And within days, many of them were dead. These were healthy men in their 20s, in peak physical condition, and they were dying faster than the doctors could understand why. Within weeks, those same soldiers boarded trains and ships, carrying the virus with them across the country and across the Atlantic Ocean, straight into the blood-soaked trenches of World War I. What followed was not just a war, it was two catastrophes happening at the same time. One that the world could see, and one that the world was forbidden to talk about. Because here is a truth that history quietly buried. The United States government knew, and they said nothing. In 1918, America was at war, and in wartime, morale is everything. President Woodrow Wilson's administration had passed the Espionage Act and the Sedition Act, laws that made it illegal to say anything that could weaken public confidence in the war effort. Reporting on a deadly plague spreading through military camps? That was dangerous to morale. That was, in the eyes of the government, almost unpatriotic. So American newspapers stayed largely silent. Editors self-censored. Public health officials downplayed. And the virus, silent, invisible, and indifferent to politics, kept spreading. By autumn of 1918, it had exploded. Cities across America were overwhelmed in ways that are almost impossible to imagine today. In Philadelphia, the streets were lined with coffins because the funeral homes had run out of room. In San Francisco, it became illegal to appear in public without a mask. In Washington, D.C., hospitals turned away patients at the door, not because they were heartless, but because there was simply no more space. Churches became morgues, schools became hospitals, and the dead were loaded into wagons like cargo. In just one single year, the Spanish flu killed somewhere between 50 and 100 million people worldwide. In the United States alone, 675,000 Americans lost their lives. To put that in perspective, that is more American deaths than World War I, World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War combined. And yet, almost no one talked about it. Part of the reason was the name itself. It was called the Spanish flu not because it started in Spain, but because Spain was one of the only countries not at war, and therefore one of the only countries whose press was free to report on the outbreak honestly. The rest of the world pointed at Spain. Spain became the face of a disease it didn't create, and in doing so, the real origins and the real failures were quietly redirected. When the war ended in November 1918, the world was exhausted, grieving, desperate to move forward. The Roaring Twenties arrived like a burst of light after a decade of darkness, and people ran toward it. Nobody wanted to look back. Nobody wanted to remember. The plague that had killed more people than the war itself was, almost collectively, forgotten. It disappeared from history books. It was barely taught in schools. Entire generations grew up without knowing it had happened. And then, in 2020, a new virus appeared. And suddenly, the world found itself doing things it had never imagined before. Masks, lockdowns, overwhelmed hospitals, misinformation, government silence, economic collapse. But here is the painful truth. We had seen all of it before. Every single piece of it. 100 years earlier, the blueprint had already been written in the suffering of 675,000 Americans, and we had simply chosen to forget. The Spanish flu did not just kill people. It exposed something far more fragile than human lungs. It exposed the human instinct to look away from uncomfortable truths, to prioritize the story we want to tell over the reality we need to face. History, it turns out, does not forget, even when we do. And the only question that remains, the only question that has ever truly mattered, is whether we are finally, truly ready to listen.